ever wondered why some speakers get applause while others actually change people? Entertaining's easy. Transformation, not so easy. Whole different story. But what if there was a way to close the gap between a talk that sounds good and one that truly shifts how people think, feel, act? Well, we got a public speaking coach who spent years helping people find what's missing in their messages and turn it into something that genuinely moves an audience. You ready? Let's go. Today's guest, Rosie Ortiz, is a TEDx speaker, coach, and author helping build confidence and influence. She's the creator of the Power of Transforming Belief method, and she has over 20 years' experience delivering training workshops and keynotes. That works for me. Welcome to the show, Rosie.
Well, thank you, Rob. I'm so happy to be here and excited about our conversation. Thank you for having me.
Outstanding. Pleasure to have you as well. So let's dive right in. And I want to start with your opinion behind the biggest difference between someone who entertains, which I often fall into the category of, and someone who actually transforms an audience, which is someone I hope I fall into the category of. But what's the difference between the two?
Oh, wow. Okay, Rob. So that's a loaded question, and I feel like there is a really big difference between the two. First you have your speakers that go up, and we all go up with the best of intentions, right? But what I have noticed, Rob, is that many times there's gaps. So this started for me like way back in the day. My background is in education and I was in professional development for many, many years. But at some point in time, I decided that I wanted to come out of that. I needed a fresh new start and I changed careers and I started to coach women. And from there was born Wonder Your Woman International, which is my speaking and coaching business. And along with that, Rob, I had a message that I wanted to share, particularly with women. So I began to look for stages, conferences, at some point having even my own events because I wanted to share this. And my goal while doing this was I wanted to transfer belief. I wanted to make sure that in the time that I had to share with whatever audience it was, that I was giving them material that was value, worth something, and that would eventually create room for transformation for them. Now, for me, this began because basically in my back in my days where I was presenting, training, speaking, even the keynoting, I found myself looking for the gaps. So it was like I would listen to people speak, but I was listening always for what was missing, right? And I even questioned, why do I do that? And I would take note, like, what was their delivery like? Did they accomplish what they set out to do? Was there room for transformation? Did they go up there and simply make the audience laugh and entertain? Or was there some room for transformation at the end? And because of that, I moved into becoming a public speaking coach, and I have created now this method that a framework that I use quite often now all the time, and it's called the power of transferring belief or how to transfer belief. So go back to the original question, Rob, I really feel that some speakers, again, we all start out off with the right intention, but somewhere along the way, there are gaps that form and we kind of miss the mark, if you will. So yeah.
Okay. So let's break it down a little bit. Keynote versus a workshop, because I can certainly see where the gaps are when we're doing a workshop. But when you're in front of a group of, 300 people for 55 minutes an hour, I'm guessing the gap is a little bit tighter because we are there to entertain. And I want to make sure you understand the questions I'm asking you. You're right; they're loaded, and believe me, I'm not advocating for too much entertainment. So don't think I'm trying to push you there.
Yeah.
I just know as a professional speaker, you're going to find me a little more entertaining in a keynote than a workshop, and that's sort of what I'm putting on the table for you.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think it's a combination of all the things, right? You have to have a little humor in there and you have to make it a little lighthearted, but there also has to be moments for transformation. So, one of the things that I think of, Rob, is when I'm in front of an audience, when any speaker is in front of an audience, you are speaking to maybe 400, 500 people, maybe 50, maybe five. But the point is that it doesn't happen, that moment for transformation really doesn't happen for everyone at the same time. So it's more about creating what I call pockets of change within your talk that will allow your listener or your audience in this case to connect with all the different things that you're saying and then eventually experience that transfer of belief, begin to think the way that it is that you want them to think, that ability to share in that same idea or that same concept, and then therefore walk out of there experiencing that. But you're absolutely right. It's not solely about that. I feel like a good speaker has to have all those things. They have to have definitely great content and definitely take all those things into account, but they also have to throw in the humor and the lightheartedness, but not make it solely about that.
Yeah. And now I'm going to jump onto your side and tell you that I actually think the entertaining part is the easy part.
You're right.
We got to have information and not too much information and information that can connect. And that's where it gets a little bit difficult. So let's stay on this moments of transformation with you. I'm assuming, well, I don't want to assume, but my guess is that an actual activity for an audience where they're actually doing something instead of hearing it might create a moment like that. Am I on the right track? And if so, give me some more. But
Yeah,
how do
yeah.
we
So,
do that?
so definitely activities are going to help, and a lot of those things are going to help. But experiencing transformation is really, Rob, about an internal shift, if you will, that starts to take place in the listener as they're listening to what you're putting out. And this shift that takes place is so profound, basically, and it's internal, and it starts to shift the mind. It starts to shift the values of the listener, and even the identity of the listener as well. Now, all of this causes them to begin to look for different ways of processing, making different choices, having a different outlook on life. And that's exactly where we want to get them. Now, obviously, that's kind of like the science behind it. We want them to do this. And this is all supported by neuroplasticity and creating new pathways to do different things. But the point of the whole thing is, yes, you said activities, and for sure, but within our talk, we want to bring them to the place of what I call intellect and emotion, to where intellect and emotion merge, because that's where the magic happens. That's where it starts to get really good because that's the breeding ground for transformation. So you might have people that are very intellectual, but when they merge with emotion, that's when the change starts to happen. And then on the flip side, you have people that are very emotional. And then when they merge with the intellect, that's where the change starts to happen. But we get there through storytelling. Storytelling is our avenue to get them to intellect and emotion and then transfer the belief and then eventually get them to transformation.
Right. All right. And we're going to break that down in a second, but I'm going to throw an idea at you and tell me if this would work for you. One of the things that I'm doing, and I'm a novice at this. I don't really put this under the microscope. I might very well be an unconscious competent. Let me pat myself on the back. But if I'm doing it right, I don't know it. So I'm not a big fan of unconscious competency. I like knowing what we're doing. So one of
Sure.
the things that I like to do with an audience, particularly an analytical audience or an audience that may think they know a little bit more, maybe a grizzled. I work with sales teams, grizzled vets. They got a sales trainer. We'll show him a thing or two. I love creating case studies that allow a group to go in an instinctive move, and a move I think they're going to go in, and then prove to them there's a different direction, as opposed to telling them, hi, here's the different direction I want
Yes.
you to go into. Sometimes they'll fight it, or sometimes they'll yawn and say, well, I would have gone that way anyhow. So I actually like to create these moments where I want that audience to go to the left and then prove to them that we go to the right.
Hmm.
That work for you in terms of trying to create transformation?
Oh yeah, definitely. That is the way to do it. I feel like when we bring them to those places, that's where we can begin to have them to start to question all these assumptions that maybe they came in with, and that's a big deal. Also, they start to maybe reframe struggles. So all of it is about getting them to have a new outlook on the way that they're currently doing things. And again, we do that through the storytelling. We do that through making sure that the stories that we're sharing with them, or in this case, activities, and you can incorporate stories into the activities. I'm big on storytelling, is making sure those stories are authentic and vulnerable, Rob, and making sure that there is a level of them being contagious in there. And then one of the big things too is making sure that they bridge the gap, right? Because so many times we as speakers, I've seen speakers do it where they maybe share a story, and in that story, I mean, it sounds great and they're giving us the final outcome, but they never put us over what I call the hump of uncertainty. They never take us over. And so we're left there like, that was great, that was amazing, but how can I accomplish that for myself too?
I'm so glad you brought that up because I do think that listen, storytelling is a very hot topic, particularly on this show. But I think a lot of times I'm hearing people they're focusing on the movement and the physical part of the story and where we're going to insert humor and the length of the story. And I happen to think that the part that we miss is connecting the story,
Oh
meaning
yeah.
this is a story I've told a few times, so I know how it ends, and clearly you must know how it ends. But we're so familiar with some of our stories that we forget that audience is hearing it for the first time, and they may not make that connection.
Yeah. So I kind of approach that with so my language that I use around that is from lack to overflow. You always assume lack when you are with an audience, right? And it's kind of basically the same thing you're saying. It's almost you have to spell it out. Some people might get it from the get-go, but it still bears you taking them in the journey from lack into overflow. And, I'll give you a perfect example. There was one time I was listening to a speaker, and she was a successful, very successful entrepreneur here local to my area. And she has some sort of supper club. She was talking about scaling her business and talking about how that very first month was so hard and all the things that you deal with as an entrepreneur. And then she said that she had a $10,000 unexpected light bill that month, right? And the audience was all waiting for the connection. The next thing we knew, she was talking about, she brought it back to, oh, and it's so successful and I'm doing so amazing and all the things. And at the end, all I could think was, but how did you make that happen? How do you take me from the lack into the overflow? How do I have that happen for me? And again, I feel like that's something that if we're not careful about, we can share our successes, we can share our victories, and all of that is great and it's necessary, but we also have to share to connect it to the other thing from the place of authenticity, the place of vulnerability, the place where the learning challenges are happening, where we share our fears and everything that caused us to grow, which I find is the place that a lot of people don't really like to disclose. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And I made up a term for this. I just made it up, so it's just out there. But I call it story jumping. And story jumping, the way I'm going to define it, is when we tell a story, it's a good story. But again, we've told it a few times and we're feeling really loose, real good up there, which is both a blessing and a curse because we really need to stay on edge. And story jumping is when I start telling you a story, which reminds me of another story.
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh. And sometimes I can get three stories deep. I'm embarrassed to tell you, realized it at times and forgotten what the first story
What the
was.
first story was, where was I?
Right. And I would caution people, and I think what where we're at right now is when we tell stories, remember, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. Obviously, have enjoy the process, but stay there because
Yeah.
I know it reminds you of something else, but got to slow that mind down a little bit and just finish the story, deliver the moral, and keep moving.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Deliver the moral, finish the story, make sure it's authentic, make sure that it's vulnerable, speak from what I call the healed place and not the wounded place. Stick to high level, your storyline, let it be high level. And another thing that I find, Rob, is share the story that you don't want to share. Many times what I've found with my audiences is that that story, the one that I've been hesitating to share. And why do we hesitate to share something? Because we feel like it might put us in kind of a bad light. We don't want people necessarily to see that side of us, right? But it's that particular story, the one that will connect. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. People, transference of belief happens when people form connections with us. Transference of belief happens when people start to question assumptions. Transference of belief happens when people start to stretch their perspectives. And we are able to curate that, when we're giving a talk. And that's what I really want speakers, when they're developing their signature talks, to understand that we can curate those things. I'll give you an example about the stories. There actually, in my book, shameless plug, which you can find on Amazon, is called Wanderlust. But in my book, I share a story, Rob, about a really kind of hard time in my life after I had gone through a divorce, and I was kind of reconstructing myself. That marriage had some financial abuse that was going on in there, and so here I was trying to rebuild myself. And as part of that, my daughters, I have two girls, said, "Hey, mom, let's redo our living room." So we start to redo the living room. And the biggest piece that needs to be taken out of there, Rob, is a couch. It was an eyesore. So we go to the furniture store. I find something that's kind of within my budget. And at this point, I had been trying to repair my credit for a while. Okay. But it wasn't where it needed to be. And we picked a couch that was within our budget. As I'm sitting there, I am already preparing myself for, uh-oh, okay, this person's going to come back and they're going to tell me that we weren't able to finance this. And I'm going to have to break it to the girls, and I'm going to just put it out there and say something like, you know what? It doesn't really matter anyway. Long story short, they come back. They approve us for the financing of this couch. And here we go. It's a fresh start for the girls, all the things, right? I didn't want to ever share that story because it made me feel, Rob, just some kind of way. It was letting people in too far, too personal, right? Now, wouldn't you know it, that's the story that people connect with. My ability to share that story, to transfer belief in that story, and the audience receiving it has allowed many times, in many instances that people have shared with me, transformation for them, and transformation in how the way they live life and in the way they see things, and being bold and daring to go out there and step out and do the things that they don't want to do. So again, sharing those things that we don't necessarily want to share. And another big component, Rob, is making our stories contagious. That's important. So I'll share a little bit about that. And that's when we make our stories contagious, we share value. Okay. And that's one of the things that makes our stories contagious. Value. When people think that they are stuck to something, this is the way that it's done. Maybe this is the dry cleaner that I have to take my clothes to because this is the best way that it's done. But when you share something that's contagious, like, hey, I'll tell you about a story where, I went and I got my dry cleaning, my dress, my wedding dress, I got it restored and whatnot. So things that are contagious, things that make your audience want to share what you have told them, also are a good breeding ground for transferring belief, because now what you have said is saving them time, or maybe it is improving their health, or maybe saving money or energy or saving heartache. So making sure that your talks are contagious is also a really, really big component of transferring belief.
I agree with you. And I'm stuck on the vulnerability. I love what you said, and you telling me that story as you were telling it, you were walking the walk, because I was thinking it's very vulnerable that story that you're telling,
Yeah. Oh,
and
sure.
yet what a perfect way to tell that story.
Hmm.
Uh, my question is this: timing. When do we become vulnerable? In other words, I've seen speakers take the stage and in their opening 2 or 3 minutes bring in a very vulnerable story.
Hmm.
And I scratched my head and thought, maybe too early, and it may be dependent on the audience. But
Hmm.
do you hold back on a story like you just told? If that was part of a presentation, would you I'm not saying the first words out of your mouth, but would it come early or would you get a little bit of confidence going with that audience before you hit them with that story?
So I have seen people start with a story, Rob, but you know, as a professional speaker that you are, you know that you set the tone, right? So I would probably hesitate starting right off the bat with that. I feel like there are other ways that we can draw our audience in, set ourselves up to then tell the story, allow them to kind of become comfortable with us a little bit before we start to venture that way. And another thing I would add to that is, you know, tragic doesn't necessarily equal effective. That's one of the other things that I've seen speakers do, where they equate transformation and transference of belief in a successful talk to making their stories as dramatic as possible. And I say, actually, it's not. You can tell your story and you can share feelings within your story, all while keeping it high level. And I've also seen speakers who have taken this route and kind of dive really deep, and then it kind of shifts the atmosphere of the room. And I don't think that it takes us in the way that we really want to go. I think that that can actually work against us instead of working for us.
Yeah, it's tricky. I'm going to tell you a quick story.
Hmm.
And it's not a presentations book, but the first book I ever wrote was on presentations. And I had John Wiley and Sons published it. And I was in my first conversation with my editor, who was reading the very first story in the preface of the book of me missing the flight I was trying to get on because it was the olden days. I'm in the 90s. We had paper tickets and nobody was really scanning. They just looked at it. I got on the wrong plane. I got on the one loading to the left instead of the right.
Oh no.
Okay. Now, the book was going to be called Under Fire, the ABCs of Corporate Training. And I was trying to make the point that there's a lot of pressure on the travel, on the presentation, et cetera.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, but here's what the editor told me. She said, and I'm going to use her language. I'm not exactly cursing, but I'm going to use her exact words. She said, listen, I appreciate you being vulnerable, but I am a page and a half into your book, and all I know is I'm supposed to learn from a schmuck who can't even get on the right airplane, who's going to tell me how to do my business. And that's, and I tell you this story because, Rosie, because I think she made a really good point. I'm going to start. The timing of stories is important, and vulnerability is critical. But there's no sci. I don't know if there's a scientific formula, but I've always been careful myself of from that story of even when I speak of opening up once I get a little more confidence
Oh
between
yeah.
me and that audience.
Oh, yeah. The audience needs to warm up to you. You need to warm up to the audience. And coming out like right off the gate like that, like a horse, I don't know that that's necessarily the best way. I think, again, you have to create the atmosphere, throw in a little humor, maybe lighten it up. And then from there, then you can go ahead and establish that. And I feel like the more time that you spend on a stage or in front of an audience, Rob, I feel like the more you begin to recognize when that perfect moment is, right? It's not like it can someone can say, "Oh, it's 5 minutes into the presentation, that's when you're going to do it," or at 7 minutes, that's when you're going to drop it. It's not that there's an exact time. It's just how long you take really to connect with the audience, because at the end of the day, it is once that connection is established, it's almost something that you can kind of feel in the air that begins to happen. People are giving you good feedback. You're seeing it in the faces, just like you can see when you've lost an audience. You can see when they're connected, and you can absolutely see like, okay, this is great. They're ready. They're primed. Now I can share the story.
Agreed. I think you can see it, and sometimes you can even hear it.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk. You used the term signature talk, so let's talk about signature talks. What do you think separates uh, a powerful signature talk, one that you maybe that who you finished coaching from the one you started with, that one-off presentation that somebody's giving? What do you think the difference is there? What separates them?
Yeah, I think, you know, when people put something together, Rob, when they put a signature talk together, it's because something has impacted them so greatly that they want to share it. They want to put this out with people. So they take a lot of time. Preparation is really is key. And then you've got the one-offs. And I do work with some people that sometimes have just a one-off presentation or something, and they're maybe not as connected to their content as someone who has put everything on the line for this. And signature talks are what we're known for, right? Like I might be known for one thing, you might be known for another thing. And so it's important that we are able to get the essence of what we're trying to say across so that people can really truly understand what our talk is about, who we are, how it represents our brand, how it represents us, because people are going to see us in the light of that talk anyway.
Yeah. And give it, and folks, give it a little time too. It's sort of, my son's a stand-up comic. He doesn't hit the big stage with a new material till he's done a few open mics. Till
There you
he's
go.
gotten a little bit of, and because what looks good on paper or in a mirror, well, you'll never know until you run it in front of an
Until you're out
audience.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I hear actually that the comedians are some of the best public speakers there are because theirs is actually probably the worst. They're, subject to sitting there and making an audience laugh. And if that doesn't happen, they're almost deemed like, was that successful, right? So
yeah.
hats off to him.
Yeah. Oh, I've always felt that comedians make great actors because
Oh, they do.
they're able to, first of all, they're able to change that delivery a lot,
Oh,
but
sure.
they can go high and they can go low. And sometimes for an actor, we struggle with that. Talk to me about this power of transferring belief method. Now here's your assignment.
Okay.
Sometimes when we get into processes, I got a few of my own. There's the longer version and then there's the shorter version because I'm sure we could do 30 minutes on the question that
I'm
I just
sure.
asked you. But give
Yeah.
me that 30,000-foot look at it.
Sure, absolutely. So at the end of the day, we all want to experience transformation, right? Or we want our audience, as a speaker, we would like our audience to experience transformation because it is that's the takeaway. That is the great takeaway. Now, all of that happens when something that we said is so profound that it causes that internal shift, right? So again, I like to say, Rob, that I teach the science of transferring belief and I coach the art of transferring belief, right? So it's important for me that people understand what's going on in the back end. So again, transformation is that internal shift that takes place, and we get them there by transferring belief. We do that when we bring them, again, like I mentioned before, to that crossroads of intellect and emotion, okay? And we want to bring our audience there. That happens through storytelling. It's almost like a pyramid. That happens through storytelling. And our storytelling has to have the components of being authentic and vulnerable. It has to be contagious, and it has to bridge that gap between the lack that the audience has or that we presume that they have when they're sitting there, and then that overflow, that abundance that we're trying to bring them into. And then, of course, lastly, a signature talk wouldn't be a signature talk if we didn't leave them with key steps, strategies, tools, a secret, a journey, because that is the practical part. That's the part that is going to allow them to take action on whatever it is that we were speaking of and need them to take action on. So I feel like those, in a nutshell, those are the steps to transferring belief to an audience and then achieving transformation. At the end of the day, Rob, when an event organizer hires you, that's what they want. They want their audience to leave transformed. They want their audience to leave better than what they came in. So for me, that's the framework that I use. That's the process, and I see a lot of value in it.
I actually think what you're describing right now is the absolute most important part of what we do professionally because
Mhm.
I've been at this for close to 40 years, and I can tell you that I might have missed it my first couple of decades because I felt I was pretty entertaining and I had great information, but at the end of the day, we learn a lot of what you're describing by what's sticking because we'll stick around this business if we don't just entertain and inform and inspire and motivate, but actually give them tools to implement what has been taught that are measurable, that a company can actually manage and see. And when
Mhm.
they do that, we don't just nail that presentation. We may have a 5 to 10 year relationship with a client.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. And at the end of the day, I like to tell the speakers that I work with, if you have a good talk, if you manage to get these things in place, that's what's going to get you paid, rehired, and recommended at the end of the
Bingo.
day. Yeah.
Bingo. Tell me the name of that book again.
It's called Wonderlust,
Okay.
Wonderlust. So Wonderlust, and it is a book where I try to encourage women to break out of what's familiar and to go after those things that they never thought they would, to challenge themselves and really find satisfaction in 7 key areas of life.
Outstanding. Good. And we can grab that on Amazon or any
Yes,
online
yes,
store.
it is
Great.
available on
Okay, good.
Amazon.
And
Yes,
folks, remember when we grab it, what do? We write reviews.
yes,
So make sure we put a
please.
review up
Those
there.
are always appreciated.
So appreciated by every author. It's just really important. It's the way things work. So part one is to get that book, and part two is to put a nice review up there. All right.
Absolutely.
Let's bring it in for a landing. Give me one, if somebody were listening right now, one practical shift a speaker could make immediately from the conversation we've just had, from what you've just laid out there, not five. Let's just give them one so we can walk the walk, you and me, actually change somebody today. All right. Give me
Yeah.
one thing that if they were going to change anything, maybe they'd look to change right now.
I would say storytelling. I know that that's a buzzword right now,
Well,
right?
it's
And
okay.
people
Yep.
love storytelling, and sometimes people don't know exactly how to incorporate storytelling into what they're saying, especially when it has nothing to do with, like, say, personal development, maybe where it's more on a professional level, but there are ways to incorporate it and to do it in a really smart way. So I would say take a look at your talk, take a look at your signature talk, take a look at your presentation, even no matter what it is, and see if there's a way that you can run a story parallel to your information, because that's what's going to cause you to be memorable. That's what's going to cause, for when your event is over, by the time that your audience walks out the door, they're going to remember who Rob is. They're going to remember because they associate the story to what you said. So I would say just make sure you've got some stories, and there's some good ones.
Perfect. And if I could dovetail on that, I would, if you're still searching, because I got the story part, you're going, but what? What story? Which story? Try this mantra. If that audience walks out with nothing else but this one thing, what would it be? And now grab what Rosie just told you and build a beautiful story around it. Maybe a little
Absolutely.
visual. Maybe we
Yeah.
let's hit on all cylinders on this one. And I want them to take 800 things out of that room with them. But if they walk out with nothing else but this one thing, that's what Rosie, I believe, is telling
Yes.
you, which is
Yes.
that's where the craft comes from.
Yes.
All right, fantastic. How do people get a hold of you, Rosie?
So they can find me, my website, wonderinyourwoman.com. And if not, they can find me on social media, LinkedIn, as well as Instagram, if they do Instagram, or Facebook, or any of the things. And the handle is the same, at Wonder in Your Woman.
Perfect. And you know the beauty of talking to somebody like you who specializes in storytelling is every story you told was crisp to the point and had a message to it. So good on you. Love the conversation. Really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And I hope people grab that book and put a wonderful review up there. And I wish you nothing but success. Thanks so much for
Thank you,
being on the
Rob. Thank you
show.
so much. I appreciate it. I love the Presentation Whisperer. It is an amazing podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosie. Well, folks, we'll do it again as well as we can next time. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. For more resources and to connect with Rob, visit thepresentationwhisperer.com.